Chapter 16. The ski pole fell from my hand and clattered to the floor. I struggled to pull away, but he grasped me tightly and jerked me into the center of the room. "Let go!" My plea came out in a choked whisper. He reached one hand out and clicked on a lamp. "Tony!" I cried. "What are you doing?" As he let go of me, his face twisted in shock. His eyes went wide and his mouth dropped open. "Whoa!" he cried, taking a step back. "Tony!" I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding so fast I could barely breathe. I thought," he started. He slapped himself on the forehead. "I'm totally losing it," he exclaimed. "You scared me to death," I finally managed to scream. Tightening the belt on his robe, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, April. Really, I'm sorry. I thought—" What did you think?" I demanded. My fear began to fade, replaced by anger. "I thought you were Josh," Tony said. "Sorry. I feel like a real jerk." "But, Tony, it's the middle of the night," I protested. "What were you doing in here?" "I heard noises," he explained, avoiding my hard stare. He dropped onto the arm of a leather armchair. "I thought it was Josh sneaking back into the house, so I came in here to investigate." "And?" I demanded, crossing my arms over the front of my bathrobe. "I heard footsteps," Tony continued, still avoiding my eyes. "So I crept over there." He pointed to the wall beside the doorway. "And I waited. When I grabbed you, I thought you were Josh. I really did." He finally raised his eyes to mine. I think he was checking to see if I believed him or not. I didn't believe him. Something about his story didn't ring true. Maybe he was just sneaking off to meet Carly, I decided. "Did you and Dara used to go out?" The words tumbled from my mouth. I guess the question had been on my mind. His expression changed. He narrowed his eyes at me suspiciously. "Yeah, for a while," he replied. He shifted his weight on the chair arm. "A very short while. No one ever went out with Dara for very long." I was surprised by Tony's bitter tone. I think he was trying to sound casual, but he couldn't keep the anger from his voice. "It was a long time ago," he added with a shrug. "Why do you care?" I don't," I stammered, feeling embarrassed. "I was just curious." "She didn't really hurt me," Tony continued. "Not the way she hurt Josh. She really messed Josh up." He sighed. "You read the letter. Why am I telling you this?" Why is he telling me this, I wondered. Was he just confiding in me, trying to be friendly? Why did I find myself so suspicious of Tony? I started to cough. My throat felt so dry. "Think I need some water," I told him. He followed me into the kitchen. I clicked on the ceiling light and blinked against the sudden brightness. The dirty dinner dishes were piled high in the sink. We were all so frightened and unhappy. We hadn't had the energy to load them in the dishwasher. Someone had spilled some spaghetti sauce and hadn't bothered to sponge it up. The dried red sauce ran down the front of the white counter like a blood stain. The drinking glasses were all dirty. I rinsed one out, then let the tap water run, waiting for it to get cold. As I took a long drink, letting the cold water soothe my parched throat, I could feel Tony's eyes on my back. I shivered and turned around to face him, wiping water off my chin with one hand. "You're really scared, aren't you?" he said softly. I nodded. "Yeah, aren't you?" He shrugged. "A little, I guess." He fiddled with the salt shaker on the counter, rolling it between his hands. "But we'll be okay, April," he continued. "The phone will be back by tomorrow. We'll phone the police and tell them about Josh. They'll find him. I'm sure he didn't get very far in this blizzard." "Probably not," I murmured. I finished the glass of water and set it down on the sink. "The police will help us find a way to get home," Tony continued. "We'll be okay." "This was supposed to be a fun weekend," I said sadly. "It's been so awful, so frightening." "Yeah, I know," Tony replied. He set the salt shaker back on the counter. "It sure didn't work out the way I planned," he snickered, a bitter laugh. "Poor Dara," I murmured. He didn't reply to that. He seemed to be deep in his own thoughts. Then finally he said, "Guess we should get some sleep. In the morning." He stopped suddenly. He let out a low gasp. I followed his gaze. He was staring at the glass door. I turned to the door. It took me a few seconds to recognize what I was seeing. Then my hands jerked up to the sides of my face, and I started to scream. Josh's frozen body, snow-covered, wide-eyed. Josh's frozen body was pressed against the glass. Chapter 17. My screams brought Carly and Jenny running into the kitchen. "April, what's wrong?" Jenny cried. "What's happening?" Ken stumbled sleepily into the room, wearing striped pajamas, his hair matted to his forehead. "Who screamed?" he demanded. I pointed to the glass door. Josh's snow-covered face stared in at us. His hands were raised above his head and pressed against the glass, as if he were trying to push the door open. Who killed Josh? The question flashed through my mind, sent a cold shudder down my back. Who killed Josh? How did he get outside the back door? I screamed again when Josh started to move. He pounded both fists against the glass. At first, I thought the wind was blowing his body against the door, but I quickly realized that Josh wasn't dead. He was alive, and struggling to get inside. Tony reached the door first. He turned the lock, then slid it open. A blast of cold air swept through the room as Josh staggered in. Tony instantly closed the door behind him. Josh shook his entire body, like a dog after a bath. Snow flew onto the kitchen floor. "Josh, what happened? Where were you?" Ken cried. Josh didn't reply. He struggled to pull off his wet coat, but couldn't get his trembling hands to work the zipper. His glasses had steamed up. A layer of snow had caked in his hair. Even his eyebrows were covered with snow. Help me," Josh croaked. He finally managed to unzip the heavy down coat. With great effort, he pulled it off and let it fall to the floor. "Don't try anything," Tony warned him sharply. "We know what you did." Josh pulled off his frosted glasses and blinked at Tony. He wiped the glasses on the front of his sweater, but they only smeared. "I need something hot." It seemed to take great effort for him to talk. His entire body trembled. His nose and ears were bright scarlet. I wondered if they were frostbitten. "Something hot, please," he begged. His legs gave out, and he started to fall. He grabbed the counter with both hands and held himself up. I've been walking so far," Josh said. He put on the wet eyeglasses. His eyes were wild and unfocused behind them. Carly moved to the sink and filled the kettle. "He's really messed up," she muttered. "I'm making coffee for everyone. Instant is all we have left." Josh lowered himself into a kitchen chair and gazed around the room. He seemed dazed, totally out of it. He pulled chunks of hardened snow from his dark hair with one hand. "Why did you kill Dara?" Tony demanded, stepping up beside him. "Huh?" Josh didn't seem able to focus. He kept blinking his eyes. His entire body shuddered again. "So cold," he murmured. He didn't even seem to hear Tony. He pressed his hands against his red cheeks. "Numb," he muttered. "Answer the question, Josh," Tony insisted sharply. "Why did you do it?" Josh gazed up at Tony, a bewildered expression on his face. "Do it?" "We found Dara's body," Tony said. "Why did you kill her?" "Dara?" Josh shook his head. His eyes appeared to swim around behind the foggy glasses. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry." "Sorry you did it," Tony demanded. "Sorry, I don't understand," Josh replied. "I'm frozen. Been walking through the snow all day." And then he uttered a sharp cry and stared up at Tony. I think Tony's words finally got through to him. "Dara?" Josh demanded. "What about Dara?" "You tell us," Tony snarled. "What about her?" Josh insisted shrilly. "Tell me. What did you say? I thought you said—" "She's dead?" Jenny cried, moving across the table from Josh. "Dara is dead, and you killed her?" "No," Josh protested, rising to his feet. The chair toppled backward and clattered to the floor. "I don't understand. I really don't understand." He grabbed his forehead and rubbed it, as if rubbing away a sharp headache. Carly slid a mug of black coffee in front of Josh. "Here, drink this," she told him. She watched Josh take the mug between his hands. Then she turned back to the counter to prepare coffee for the rest of us. Josh warmed his hands on the mug. Then he raised it to his lips, holding it between both trembling hands. The steam rose up from the mug and fogged his glasses. He took a long sip, then another. It appeared to revive him a little. He picked up the fallen chair and sat back down in it. His eyes locked on me. "Dara is dead? You're serious?" I nodded. I stared back intently at him, studying his face. He was doing a good job of acting innocent, I thought. But we knew the truth. We had found his letter and read it. We knew the truth about Josh, and we knew why he had come back to Dara's house. To get the letter that proved his guilt. The shaking hands, the snow-covered hair, the trembling and stammering, all an act. I knew it. We all knew it. "How can Dara be dead?" Josh asked innocently. "Josh, it's no good," I told him. "We found your letter to Dara. We know everything." He didn't react to that at all, didn't move a muscle. "Why did you do it? Why?" Jenny shrieked. Ken moved over to her and put his arm around her shoulders. Josh stared up at me. "What letter?" he demanded, still pretending to be confused. I rolled my eyes. "The letter you wrote to Dara, you accidentally left it behind. We found it next to Dara's bed." Josh shook his head hard, as if trying to clear it. Carly set down the kettle and hurried from the kitchen. I heard her padding down the hall. A few seconds later, she reappeared with a letter in her hand. "Here it is," she told Josh breathlessly. Josh took it eagerly from Carly's hand. Tony moved quickly to grab Josh's wrist. "Don't try to destroy it," he warned. "Better let me hold it." "I just want to read it," Josh insisted. I watched his eyes quickly run down the page. His expression became more and more bewildered as he read the letter. When he raised his eyes to us, his face, which had been so red, had gone pale. It's a total lie," Josh cried. "This isn't my handwriting. I didn't write this letter." Chapter 18. "You're a liar," Jenny accused. "You've been lying ever since we let you in." "I'm not," Josh insisted. "This letter—" "How can you pretend you didn't know Dara was dead?" Jenny demanded. "We're not total morons, Josh." Tony pulled the letter from Josh's trembling hand. "We're holding on to this," he said quietly. "This is evidence." "Josh, there's no way you can lie your way out of this," Ken said sharply, his arm still around Jenny's shoulders. "We're calling the town police as soon as the phone line is fixed. You killed Dara, and you tried to get away in her Jeep." "No way," Josh protested. His hand shook so violently he spilled coffee from his mug. "I know it looks bad. I mean, taking the Jeep, driving away. But I'm telling the truth. I didn't kill Dara, and I didn't write that letter." "I think we should tie him up or lock him in a room," Tony said to me. He moved behind Josh's chair, blocking any try at escape. I sighed. I glanced at the clock over the stove. Nearly 2 a.m. "Let him tell his story first," I told Tony. I grabbed a mug of coffee, poured milk into it, then sat down across from Josh at the table. The others gathered around. I studied Josh as he began to talk. I was trying to read his eyes, trying to tell if anything he said was true. "I was so messed up last night," he started, leaning over the table, spinning his coffee mug slowly between his hands. "I was so upset. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I stayed dressed. I paced back and forth in the living room, getting more and more angry." "Angry about what? About the truth or dare game?" I asked. Josh nodded. "I just can't stand being made fun of. When Dara started to tell everyone that I was the worst kisser she'd ever known, I really lost it. I did want to kill her then. I really did." "So, you admit it? You killed her?" Jenny broke in. "Let him go on," I scolded her. "I didn't," Josh insisted, "but I was so hurt. And so embarrassed. I have a short fuse, I admit it. I can't stand to be teased, especially not by Dara. I don't want to get into it now, but Dara already hurt me. A lot." "That's all in the letter," I told myself. "Josh doesn't mean to, but he's proving that he wrote that letter." "I just sort of lost it," Josh continued, twirling the coffee mug, staring down at it as he talked. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I was too angry. I decided to take Dara's Jeep and strand her here. I wanted to teach her a lesson." "You taught her a lesson, all right," Ken said sarcastically. "So I stole the keys and took the Jeep," Josh continued, ignoring him. "I left early in the morning. It was crazy. It was so totally crazy. I didn't remember my bag or anything. All I could think of was paying Dara back for hurting me. I drove like a madman, through the snow, but I didn't get far." "What happened?" I asked. Josh took a long sip of coffee. "It was impossible to drive," he said. "I kept sliding off the road. The road to town was completely blocked off. So I ended up on some back road. I didn't know where or when or anything." He shook his head and let out a weary sigh. "I slid into a deep drift. I couldn't get out. I tried everything. I was stuck, and it was snowing so hard I couldn't even see where I was." He took another sip of coffee, emptying the mug. "I kept the engine on because I needed the heater, but the gas tank was nearly empty, so I had to turn it off. I waited for a car or truck to come by, to rescue me, but the road was empty. No one, not a single car. I sat there for an hour or two, but I knew I couldn't sit there much longer. I'd freeze to death." "So you started to walk?" I asked. Josh nodded. "I left the Jeep and started to walk. I walked for a long time, then realized I was heading in the wrong direction, so I doubled back. I didn't realize how far I had gone." He shook his head sadly. I wanted to come back to the house and apologize to everyone. I had been such a jerk. I wanted to apologize for taking the Jeep. I walked for hours. I lost track of the time. I think my brain froze up or something. I thought maybe I'd come to town, but I didn't, so I just kept walking till I got here. Josh raised his eyes to me. That's the whole story, and this the truth, he said softly. He glanced around the table, trying to see if everyone believed him. I can't believe Dara is dead, he added. I can't believe someone murdered her and wrote that phony letter. Those words gave me a chill. I realized that I believed Josh. He seems to be telling the truth. He had acted crazily, thoughtfully, but I believed him when he said he didn't kill Dara. I swallowed hard. That meant only one thing. Someone else murdered Dara. Someone in this room. Gray light. I woke up Sunday morning, bathed in cold gray light. It filtered through the thin white curtains over the bedroom window, making the room feel even colder than it was. Stretching, I made my way sleepily across the room, pushed the curtains out of the way, and peered out. The heavy storm clouds still darkened the sky, hovering low over the trees. The snow still came down, tossed by the swirling winds. The snow came down in sheets, so thick I could barely make out the pine trees that tilted down the sloping hill. Am I ever going to get out of here? I wondered, shivering. I got dressed quickly, pulling on black leggings and a heavy blue wool sweater. Making my way down the hall, I heard voices in the kitchen. The tangy aroma of bacon frying floated out and mixed with the smell of coffee. I can't face breakfast this morning, I murmured out loud. I turned away from the kitchen. I can't face any of them either, I decided. One of them is a murderer. The words made my stomach tighten. The bacon smell suddenly made me feel ill. A small red phone on the hallway table caught my eye. Had anyone called the police? Were they coming to get Josh? Had anyone called to report the murder? To tell them we were stranded here? Stranded here with a frozen corpse in the garage? I picked up the receiver and listened. Still silent. Still dead. I let out a disappointed groan. I can't spend another day in this house, I thought. It's a house of death. A house of horror. I took a deep breath. Get it together, April, I scolded myself. April, good morning. I turned to see Ken standing in the hallway. Morning, I muttered. How are you doing? He asked brightly. His brown hair was still wet from the shower. He carried a coffee mug in one hand. Are you coming in for breakfast? Yeah, I guess, I muttered. I took a few steps toward the kitchen, but he moved to block my path. Could I talk to you sometime this morning? He asked, lowering his voice. His dark eyes locked on mine. Yeah, sure, I replied, trying to sound casual. What about? He hesitated. Well, you said something the other night. The girl on Sumner Island. That girl was the last thing I wanted to discuss with Ken. Every time I thought about her, I felt guilty. Guilty that I hadn't the nerve to tell Jenny about seeing Ken and that girl. I certainly didn't want to discuss her with Ken. What could I say to him? That I thought he was a total rat? So, can we talk? He demanded. Maybe later, I told him. Why had I blurted out that answer during the game? Why didn't I keep my big mouth shut? The girl from Sumner Island floated through my mind again. Once more, I saw her and Ken, kissing on the beach, kissing so passionately. Shaking the picture from my mind, I followed Ken into the kitchen. Tony and Carly were sitting glumly at the table. I didn't see Jenny or Josh. Is this snow ever going to end? Tony said, yawning. We've got to get out of here, Carly added, then finished a small glass of orange juice. I silently agreed. I poured myself some orange juice, but it tasted sour. I buttered a slice of bread and choked it down. I really didn't feel like eating, and I didn't feel like being with these people. Where's Jenny? I asked. Still asleep? Carly replied. I think Josh is still asleep, too. Shouldn't we keep a close eye on him? Tony asked. He isn't going anywhere, Ken replied, buttering a slice of toast. He's trapped here like we are. I turned and started out of the kitchen. Where are you going? Ken demanded. Just back to my room, I called back. He said something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I wasn't feeling very social this morning. I hurried down the hall. I stopped outside my door. I heard noises inside the room, footsteps, drawers being opened and slammed. My breath caught in my throat. Who was in my room? Cautiously, I gripped the door frame and leaned forward, poking my head into the room, and saw Josh, bent over the dresser, pulling out drawers, frantically searching through my things. Chapter 19. Josh, what are you doing? I screamed. I really startled him. He cried out and stumbled back from the dresser. April, I stormed into the room. What were you looking for? What are you doing in here? I shrieked. Why are you tearing up my room? His slender face turned beet red. He pushed his glasses up on his nose. I was looking for the pen, he finally managed to reply. My mouth dropped open. The pen? The pen that wrote the letter to Dara? The red ballpoint? He said. Standing awkwardly in the center of the room, he avoided my eyes. You admit that it was your pen? I cried. No way, he insisted heatedly. I didn't write that letter, April. I want to find out who did. If I can find the pen that wrote it. His voice trailed off. You think I wrote it? I cried. He didn't reply. I stood waiting, hands pressed against my waist. Do you think I'm the one who wrote that letter? I repeated. I don't know. I don't know you, do I? He replied. His voice trembled with emotion. I don't know anything. I just know that someone in this house wrote that letter. Not me. Someone else killed Dara. But Josh, I started. The pen has to be somewhere, he insisted, and I'm going to search every room in the house until I find it. If I can find the pen, I can prove that I didn't write that note. Well, you won't find it in my room, I shrieked. Get out! Get out! I knew I was totally losing it, but I didn't care. I was trapped in this house, with a dead body in the garage, and possibly a murderer in my room. Get out, Josh, I screamed. I grabbed him by both shoulders and shoved him hard toward the door. He glared at me angrily. I felt a stab of fear, but he turned and slunk out of the room. I can't take it any more, I shrieked out loud. I stared out the window, still snowing, but not quite as hard. I'm getting out, I told myself. I'm getting out of here. I don't care about the snow. I don't care about the cold. I don't care about anything. I just have to get out, get help, get home. My heart was pounding. The gray light swirled around me, so heavy and cold. I knew I wasn't thinking calmly, clearly, but I didn't care. Finding Josh pawing through my clothes was the final straw. I made my way silently down the hall, hoping the others wouldn't hear me, hoping no one would come out of the kitchen. My boots were near the front door. I sat down on the floor and pulled them over my leggings. Then I stood up and walked over to the pile of coats. We had all just tossed our coats down when we came in, and we had all been wearing each other's coats, so they were totally jumbled. I pulled up each coat one by one. Weird, I muttered. My parka wasn't in the pile. I searched through the pile again, more carefully this time. Then I searched through the coat closet. Not there either. Had I hung the parka in my bedroom closet? I hurried back down the hall and made a complete search of the bedroom. No parka. I stopped in the center of the room to think. Where had I put it? Did I take it into one of the other rooms? No. The last I remembered, I had dropped it on the pile of coats near the front door. It should be here, I thought. My parka should be here on the pile. Where is it? Where? I shuffled frantically through the coats again, tossing them wildly aside as I searched. Not here, not here, not here. And then a picture flashed into my mind. A horrifying picture. A picture that made my entire body tremble in shock. Chapter 20. The picture was a horrifying image of Dara's frozen body, outside on the back porch. Dara's frozen corpse, lying stiffly in the snow, her eyes frozen wide in shock and horror. The hatchet buried deep in her shoulders, buried deep in a blue parka. My blue parka? Was it my blue parka? Had Dara been wearing my coat on Friday night? With a gasp, I hurtled to the front door. I didn't even think of pulling on a coat. I didn't think at all. The picture in my mind forced away all other thoughts. I burst out into the snow. My boots sank into a deep drift. I raised my knees high, made my way to the garage. Another step, then another. Breathing hard, my breath steaming up above me. The snow in my face, in my eyes, pushing me back as if trying to keep me from my destination. I bent to lift the garage door. The handle was covered with icy snow. The frozen door didn't want to open. I tugged with both hands and finally got it to slide. The door rumbled up. I stepped inside, brushing snow from my eyes. I stared into the darkness, stared down at Dara. They had propped her against the wall, next to an old bicycle. Her eyes, wide open, had sunk back into her head. They stared out at me accusingly. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to lower my gaze from her frozen face, struggled to focus on the parka she wore. Yes, my parka. Dara wore my blue parka. Dara wore my parka Friday night when she was murdered. The hatchet had sliced through the shoulder of my parka. And as I gaped at the corpse in horror, another picture forced itself into my mind. I pictured myself out in the snow. I pictured myself late Friday night in the dark, walking to the woodshed. Because with the hood of my blue parka pulled up, Dara would have looked just like me. Me. And I pictured myself stiff and frozen and dead, standing at the open garage door, staring down at the frozen blue-faced corpse. The cold lowered over me. Cold and darkness. Darkness I could feel. And I knew that Dara had died by mistake. It was me lying there. Me. The murderer had meant to kill me. Chapter 21. With a low cry I stumbled out of the garage and made my way through the snow back into the house. My coat! The words tumbled from my mouth as I pulled the front door closed behind me. What to do? What to do? Someone had tried to kill me. Was it Josh? Was it one of the others? I didn't want to think about it. I was too crazed to think clearly about anything. Maybe I can get help, I told myself, trying to stop my body from trembling. Maybe I can get to the road, get to a ski lodge, find someone, find anyone who can get me to the police. I grabbed a coat off the pile, a big red down coat. I didn't know whose. I didn't care. Pulling the coat over my shoulders, I jerked open the front door and darted back outside. My boots sank into the deep powdery snow as I trudged to the driveway. The wind had driven the snow into deep drifts. The snow that fell now was wet and icy, more like sleet than snow. I glanced back at the house. Had anyone seen me leave? Was anyone following me? No, no one in the window. I'm getting away, I thought. It was colder than I thought. The cold stung my face and made my nostrils burn when I inhaled. Struggling to zip the bulky coat, I lurched down the hill. The wind seemed to be blowing right in my face. I leaned into it and shut my eyes against the wet, falling snow. I'm out, I cried out loud, my voice muffled in the wind. I'm out of there. I can make it, I told myself. I can make it to the nearest ski lodge. I squinted to the bottom of the hill. I could barely make out the snow-covered road. The plows had left long mounds of snow that trailed along the sides, but more snow had covered the pavement in a deep blanket of white. I leaned into the stiff wind, shielding my eyes from the blowing snow and the bright, silvery glare. I finally managed to zip the coat, but it was too big. As I walked, the wind sprawled up the front of it and down the collar. This must be Ken's coat, I realized. Ken is the biggest person in the house. Yes, I could picture Ken in the coat. Picture him with his heavy red sleeve around Jenny's shoulders. Picture him running to catch the Shadyside bus after school, the red coat flapping behind him like a big flag. And then I pictured him once again with the girl on Sumner Island last summer. I pictured them laughing together, snuggling, kissing on the beach. I had been so shocked, I nearly ran over to them and pulled them apart. I nearly confronted Ken right there and then. I was so horrified, and so furious at him. What would have happened if I had run onto the beach and let Ken know I was there? What would he have done? What would have happened between Ken and Jenny? I cried out as my boots sank into a deep snowdrift, and I toppled forward. My hands shot out, too late. I landed hard, sank into the white cold. I scrambled up quickly and brushed myself off. Keep moving, I urged myself. Don't stop. You can't stop until you find someone. My cheeks burned. The cold made my temples throb with pain. I touched my nose. It was already numb. Frostbite. The word made me gasp. I rubbed my ears, also numb. I'm not going to make it, I thought. I was still a long way from the road. Not a car or truck had passed by. There was no one out in this storm. Only me. Keep going, April, I urged myself. Don't give up. You can do it. You can find someone to help you. You don't want to go back to that house. There's a murderer back there. A murderer waiting for you. Unable to stop my entire body from shivering, I shoved my hands into the deep pockets of Ken's coat. Why hadn't I stopped to find some gloves, or a hat, or a scarf? I was so stupid, so crazy, so desperate to get away. But now the wind was whipping the snow in my face, pushing me back as I tried to get down the hill. The cold forced my eyes to tear up. My chest ached. My breath steamed up as I panted hard, breathing through my mouth. I dug my hands deeper into the coat pockets, and my right hand wrapped around something, a thin object, metal or plastic. I pulled it out and raised it close to my face to examine it. A pen. A ballpoint pen. A red plastic ballpoint pen. I checked the tip. Red. Red ink. I stopped walking. I stared at the pen in horror. I no longer cared about the wind, the cold, the blowing snow. I no longer noticed them. I knew what I was holding. The pen that had written the letter to Dara. Chapter 22. I started to shiver again. The pen blurred in front of my eyes. My hand began trembling so hard I nearly dropped it into the snow. Gripping it tightly, I shoved it back into the coat pocket. The wind swirled the snow around me. I rubbed my nose, trying to rub some feeling back into it. Then I pulled my hair down over my ears to protect them, tucking the hair into the coat collar. The murderer wasn't Josh, I realized. The murderer was Ken. I tried to picture what had happened. I pictured Ken following Dara out into the snow, sneaking up behind her, bringing the hatchet down, thinking it was me. And why? Because of my truth or dare answer? Because I knew about Ken and the girl from last summer? And when he realized he had killed Dara instead of me, he wrote the letter, to blame Josh. I turned back toward the top of the hill, stopped, turned away again. I suddenly felt like one of the tiny snowflakes being tossed and twirled by the wind. I felt helpless as a snowflake, helpless and fragile. I gazed down at the snowy road. The road led to another hill, a steeper hill with a ski lift that led up to the slopes, and a short distance beyond that hill there were ski lodges and motels, and then the town. It all seemed so far away, so impossibly far away. Leaning into the wind, I started walking anyway. What choice did I have? "Oh!" I cried out as I stepped into a deep drift, and the snow rose up over my boot tops. I could feel the frozen, wet snow pour into my boots. I was nearly to the bottom of the hill when I heard crunching sounds behind me. I ignored them at first, but they grew louder, and then I heard low grunts, someone breathing hard. I turned back, stared up at the hill, squinting into the shifting, blowing snow, and saw someone chasing after me, running hard. A dark figure, his face hidden in the gray. Who is it? Who? I wondered. His grunting breaths grew louder. He was running so hard, so fast, his arms outstretched as if reaching to grab me, so eager to catch up with me, to catch me. I froze in fear, watching, squinting into the billowing snow, the shimmering gray light, struggling to see. By the time I realized it was Ken, it was too late. I turned and started to run, slipping and sliding down the frozen hill. I screamed as I felt his arms wrap roughly around my waist. He tackled me down from behind, pulled me down into the deep snow. "Ken, let me go," I begged. "Please, let me go."